war fleet of the Draconith Empire hung above Earth like a crown of burning stars. Each ship larger than a mountain, each cannon capable of melting entire continents into glass. And at the center of this terrible formation sat the flagship of Emperor Jarvex the Undying, Dragon King of the 17 systems. Ruler of more worlds than most species could count, Jarvex stood at the observation deck of his vessel, his massive form casting a shadow across the polished floor, his scales black as the void between galaxies. Scarred from 10,000 years of conquest and battle, his eyes burning with amber fire that had watched civilizations rise and fall like waves upon a shore, he had lived for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to be young, forgotten what it meant to feel doubt or uncertainty or fear. And in all those countless centuries, he had never once met a species that did not tremble before his might, until now the humans of Earth had done something that no other species had ever done in the long and bloody history of the Draconith conquests. Something so strange and unexpected that Jarvex found himself unable to process it fully. They had laughed at him. His diplomats had descended to Earth 3 days ago with the standard terms of surrender, the same terms that had been accepted by 1,000 worlds before, the same demands for total submission that every intelligent species eventually agreed to when faced with the overwhelming power of the Dragon Fleet. The human delegates had listened politely to every word, had examined the documents carefully, had asked thoughtful questions about the specific terms and conditions. And then they had started laughing, not cruel laughter or mocking laughter, but genuine amusement, as if the whole situation was somehow funny to them. "I am sorry," one of the human leaders had said while wiping tears from her eyes. "But you want us to do what exactly? Give you everything we have and become your slaves forever? That is your offer?" The Draconith diplomat had confirmed that yes, this was indeed the offer. And the humans had laughed even harder now. Jarvex stood watching the blue and green world spinning slowly below his fleet. And for the first time in 3,000 years, he felt something cold and unfamiliar crawling through his ancient heart. Admiral Korath approached from behind, his red scales gleaming in the dim light of the observation deck, his posture rigid with barely contained frustration. "My Emperor," Korath said, "the humans have rejected our terms. They say they would rather die than surrender. Our warriors are eager for battle and await your command to begin the bombardment." Jarvex did not respond immediately. Instead, he continued to stare at the planet below, at the swirling white clouds and the vast blue oceans and the patches of green and brown that marked the lands where billions of humans lived their short and fragile lives. "Have the psychic probes returned their readings?" Jarvex asked, his voice deep as thunder rolling across distant mountains. "They have, my Emperor, and the results are most disturbing," Korath replied, his tail twitching with unease. "The probes detect no significant fear response from the human population. There is anxiety, yes, and concern, certainly, but not the overwhelming terror we typically see before a conquest. They know we are here, and they know what we can do, but they are not afraid." Jarvex turned slowly to face his admiral, his amber eyes narrowing with suspicion. "That is impossible," the Dragon King said. "Every species fears destruction. It is the most basic instinct of all living things. Even the mighty Vorathians begged for mercy when our fleet darkened their skies. Even the ancient crystalline minds of Zephyros shattered themselves in panic rather than face our wrath. I know, my Emperor, I have no explanation for this anomaly. Our precognitive scanners show the same thing. The humans are not planning any secret weapon or hidden defense that might give them confidence. They simply do not seem to care that we might destroy them." Jarvex was silent for a long moment, his clawed hands gripping the railing of the observation deck so tightly that the metal began to bend beneath his strength. In all his years of conquest, he had learned one fundamental truth about the universe: that every intelligent species was ultimately motivated by fear. Fear of death and fear of pain and fear of losing what they held dear. This fear was the lever that moved worlds, the tool that bent civilizations to his will. But what did you do with a species that did not fear? Perhaps they are simply too primitive to understand the danger, Korath suggested. Their technology is barely capable of reaching their own moon. They may not comprehend what our weapons can do. No, Jarvek said slowly. They understand. I saw it in their eyes during the negotiations. They know exactly what we are capable of, and they simply do not care. This is something else. Something I have not encountered before. He made a decision then. One that surprised even himself. I will go down to the surface, Jarvek announced. Alone and unannounced, I want to see these humans for myself. I want to understand why they do not fear us. Korath's eyes widened with alarm. My Emperor, that is extremely dangerous. We know nothing of their capabilities. They could be hiding weapons or traps, or they have nothing that can harm me, Jarvek interrupted. And this was true. His personal shields could withstand the heat of a star, and his scales had been hardened by centuries of exposure to exotic radiations and extreme environments. I will observe them without their knowledge, and I will learn their secret. He activated the transport beacon on his wrist, the ancient device humming with power as it prepared to send his physical form across the void to the planet below. If I do not return within one planetary rotation, Jarvek said to his admiral, you may begin the bombardment. And then he was gone, his massive form dissolving into a stream of golden light that shot down toward the blue world below, toward the strange species that laughed in the face of extinction, toward an encounter that would change him in ways he could not possibly imagine. Dragon King was going to visit humanity, and humanity had no idea he was coming. The transport beam deposited Jarvek in the middle of a street in a human city, not their capital and not their military headquarters, but an ordinary settlement that his navigation systems had selected at random, a place called Riverside in a region called California in a nation called the United States. He wanted to see the humans as they truly were, unguarded and unprepared, going about their daily lives beneath the shadow of certain doom. What he found made no sense to him at all. The street was lined with small buildings and growing things that the humans called trees, and there were vehicles moving along the road and people walking on the paths beside it. And none of them seemed to be in any particular hurry or distress, despite the fact that a fleet capable of destroying their entire world hung in the sky. Above them, Jarvek stood in the middle of the street, his 12-foot form wrapped in dimensional shielding that made him shimmer like a heat mirage, his black scales absorbing the warm yellow light of the human sun, his amber eyes scanning the scene before him with growing confusion. A vehicle stopped in front of him, and a human leaned out of the window, a middle-aged male with gray hair and tired eyes. Hey, buddy, the human said. You mind moving? Some of us have to get to work. Jarvek stared at the human in disbelief. This tiny, fragile creature in its primitive wheeled transport was asking him, the Dragon King of the 17 systems, to move out of its way. And there was no fear in its voice, only mild annoyance. He stepped aside without thinking, too stunned to do anything else, and the vehicle drove past him with the human waving a casual hand in thanks. More humans were noticing him now, stopping on the walkways to stare at the massive reptilian figure that had appeared in their midst. Some of them pulled out small devices and began taking pictures. Others pointed and whispered to each other. A few simply shrugged and continued on their way as if seeing an alien emperor on their street was just another ordinary occurrence. A small human child, barely reaching to Jarvek's knee, broke free from its parent and ran toward him with eyes wide with wonder rather than terror. Mommy, look, the child shouted. A dragon, a real dragon. Can I pet it? The parent hurried over and grabbed the child's hand. pulling it back gently while offering Jarvex an apologetic smile. "Sorry about that," the parent said. "She loves dragons. We just watched a movie about them last night. Your costume is really impressive, by the way. Is there some kind of convention in town?" Jarvex opened his mouth to explain that he was not wearing a costume, that he was in fact the most feared being in 17 star systems, that he had personally executed billions of living creatures and watched their worlds burn beneath his gaze. But no words came out. The parent waited politely for a moment, then shrugged and led the child away, the little one waving goodbye over her shoulder with a bright and innocent smile. A group of uniformed humans arrived then, wearing what appeared to be some kind of law enforcement attire and carrying primitive projectile weapons at their sides, their faces showing caution, but not the blind panic that Jarvex had expected. "Okay," said the leader of the group, a tall female with short, dark hair and steady eyes. "I am going to need to see some identification. We have received reports of an unregistered alien in the area, and I am assuming that is you." "I am Emperor Jarvex," he said, finally finding his voice. "Dragon King of the 17 systems. I have conquered 1,000 worlds and burned civilizations that were ancient when your species was still living in caves." The officers exchanged glances with each other. "Right?" said the leader slowly. "Well, Emperor, you cannot just materialize in the middle of the street like that. You are blocking traffic and causing a disturbance. If you want to visit our planet, there are proper channels for that sort of thing. I could destroy your entire world with a single command," Jarvex said, and there was genuine confusion in his voice, now rather than threat. "Does that not concern you?" The officer sighed the way someone sighs when they have dealt with difficult situations too many times before. "Look, I have had a very long day. There is a fleet of alien warships in orbit that everyone keeps talking about, and my kids are scared, and my husband cannot stop watching the news. So yes, I am concerned, but right now my job is to keep the peace in this neighborhood, and you standing in the middle of Oak Street is not helping anyone." She gestured toward the sidewalk. "Can you please just move to the side so cars can get through? We can talk about the whole conquering thing afterward if you want. There is a coffee shop right there, and I hear they make excellent pastries." Jarvex moved to the sidewalk, not because he was afraid of these humans or their primitive weapons, but because he genuinely did not know what else to do. In all his centuries of conquest, he had never encountered anything like this. Species either fought or fled or surrendered. They did not offer him coffee and complain about traffic. The officers thanked him politely and went about their business, leaving Jarvex standing alone on the sidewalk of an alien world, more confused than he had ever been in his impossibly long life. He began to walk, his massive feet leaving cracks in the pavement with each step, his eyes taking in every detail of this strange place and these strange people who did not seem to understand that they should be terrified of him. He passed a building where young humans sat in rows and an older human stood at the front teaching them something from a large book. He passed a park where humans of all ages played games and threw balls and laughed together beneath the warm sun. He passed a hospital where humans worked frantically to save the lives of their sick and injured. And nowhere did he see the despair and terror that should have gripped a doomed world. And then he smelled something. It was a warm smell, sweet and rich and utterly unlike anything he had encountered in all his travels across the galaxy. It seemed to reach past his nostrils and straight into some ancient part of his brain, triggering memories he did not know he had, feelings he had thought burned away by the centuries. He followed the smell down a side street and around a corner until he found its source. A small building with large windows and a hand-painted sign that read, Myra's Bakery, established 2847. Through the glass he could see shelves, lined with golden loaves of bread and trays of colorful sweets, and an old human woman with flour on her hands and silver in her hair, standing behind a counter and smiling at a customer. She looked up then, and her eyes met his through the window. And for a long moment they simply stared at each other. The ancient destroyer of worlds and the elderly baker of bread. And then she did something that Jarvex would never forget. She smiled at him. A warm and genuine smile, without any trace of fear. And she gestured for him to come inside. The Dragon King of the 17 systems, conqueror of 1,000 worlds, found himself walking toward the door of a small bakery on a quiet street in a tiny human city. Drawn by a smell and a smile, and a mystery he could not explain, he had come to this world to discover. Why humans did not fear him, he was about to get his answer. The door of the bakery was too small for Jarvex, so he had to duck low and turn sideways to fit through it, his horns scraping against the wooden frame and leaving deep gouges in the paint. His massive shoulders barely squeezing through the opening inside the bakery was warm and bright, filled with the smell of fresh bread and sweet things baking in ovens. The walls were painted a soft yellow color and decorated with pictures of flowers and landscapes and smiling faces. There were small tables with chairs where customers could sit and enjoy their purchases. And behind the counter stood the old woman he had seen through the window. She was small even by human standards, her back slightly bent with age, her hair white as snow and pulled back in a simple knot, her face lined with the marks of many years lived, her hands strong and capable despite their wrinkles. Covered in flour from her work, she looked up at Jarvex without any sign of surprise or fear, as if 12-foot alien emperors walked into her shop every day of the week. "Well now," she said, and her voice was warm like the bread in her ovens, "you look like you have come a very long way. Why do you not sit down and rest for a moment?" Jarvex looked at the small chairs and knew they could never support his weight. But there was a sturdy wooden bench against one wall that seemed like it might hold him. So he lowered himself onto it carefully, his clawed feet extending out across the floor, his tail curling around the leg of a nearby table. "I am Myra," the old woman said, wiping her hands on her apron and coming around the counter to stand before him. "This is my bakery. I have owned it for 63 years now, ever since my mother passed it on to me, and her mother passed it to her before that. We have been baking bread in this spot for almost 200 years. I am Emperor Jarvex," he said, and his voice seemed too loud for this small and gentle space. "Dragon King of the 17 systems. I have conquered 1,000 worlds. I am sure you have, dear," Myra said with a small nod. "But right now you look hungry. Let me get you something to eat." She turned and went back behind her counter, pulling a golden loaf from one of the shelves and cutting a thick slice with a long knife. She placed it on a small plate and brought it over to him, setting it down on the table beside his bench. "This is my honey bread," she said. "It is made from a recipe my grandmother created during the collapse. She said that even in the darkest times people deserved something sweet, something that reminded them that good things still existed in the world." Jarvex looked at the slice of bread, at the golden crust and the soft interior, at the way it steamed gently in the warm air of the bakery, and he felt something strange stirring in his chest, something he had not felt in so very long that he had forgotten its name. "Why are you not afraid of me?" he asked, and there was genuine confusion in his voice. "I could kill you with a thought. I could burn this entire city to ash with a single command to my fleet. Your whole species is helpless before my power." Myra settled into a chair across from him, moving slowly the way old people do, her joints creaking but her eyes remaining sharp and clear. "Oh, I am afraid," she said simply. "Anyone who says they are not afraid when death is near is either lying or foolish. But fear is just a feeling. It comes and it goes like the weather. What matters is what you do while you are feeling it." She reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a small folded cloth, which she set on the table beside the plate of bread. "This is a napkin," she said. My grandmother made it during the worst years of the collapse, when the water wars were killing millions and the famines were spreading across every continent, and it seemed like humanity might not survive at all. Jarvex looked at the napkin. It was simple and old, the fabric worn thin in places and repaired many times with careful stitches. Embroidered with small flowers and faded colors of blue and yellow and green. She made napkins, Mira continued. Hundreds of them, even when there was barely any food to eat and no water to wash with, and bombs were falling on the cities. She would sit in the shelter with the other survivors, and she would make napkins. Why? Jarvex asked, and he was genuinely curious now. Genuinely interested in this strange little story from this strange little woman. Because she said that as long as people had something soft to hold, something beautiful to look at, something made with love and care, they could remember that they were still human, that they were more than just animals fighting for survival, that there was still goodness in the world worth protecting. She pushed the napkin toward him. "Go on," she said. "Pick it up." Jarvex hesitated, his clawed hand hovering over the delicate fabric, his talons that had torn through battleship hulls and crushed the skulls of enemy commanders trembling slightly as they approached this simple piece of embroidered cloth. He picked it up, and then he heard it there was a sound coming from the napkin. Not a physical sound that his ears could detect, but something deeper. Something that resonated in a part of his mind that he had thought dead and silent for thousands of years. A frequency woven into the very threads of the fabric. He heard a woman humming softly as she stitched flowers into cloth by candlelight. Heard children laughing somewhere in the distance, despite the sound of explosions overhead. He heard prayers being whispered in languages he did not know but somehow understood. He heard a mother singing a lullaby to a frightened child. He heard the steady heartbeat of hope refusing to surrender to despair. Napkins sang to him of every moment of love and courage and stubborn determination that had gone into its making. Every stitch was a small act of defiance against the darkness. Every thread was a declaration that beauty mattered even when the world was falling apart. Felt something hot and wet on his face, and he raised his free hand to touch it, his clawed fingers coming away damp with a liquid he did not recognize at first. Was crying the Dragon King of the 17 systems, who had watched worlds burn without feeling anything at all, who had ordered the deaths of billions without a moment of regret, was crying over a small embroidered napkin in a tiny bakery on a planet he had planned to destroy. How is this possible? He whispered, and his voice was broken now, cracked and raw with emotions he had not felt in so long that they seemed almost new. This is just cloth and thread. There is no magic here, no technology, nothing that should be able to affect me like this. Myra smiled at him, and there was understanding in her old eyes. Understanding and something that might have been compassion. "It is not magic," she said softly. "It is love." My grandmother put her love into every stitch of that napkin. Her love for her family and her friends and her world. Her love for the future she hoped they would have. Love is the most powerful force in the universe, Emperor. More powerful than any weapon your people have ever built. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. That is why we do not fear you. Not because we think we can defeat you. Not because we have some secret weapon or hidden defense. But because we have already learned that fear is not what matters. What matters is love. What matters is hope. What matters is holding on to what makes us human, even when everything seems lost. Jarvex sat in the warm quiet of the bakery, holding a napkin made by a human woman 200 years dead, listening to the song of love and hope and stubborn courage that she had woven into its threads. And he felt something inside him beginning to change. Something ancient and cold beginning to thaw. He had come to this world seeking to understand why humans did not fear him. He was beginning to understand that he had been asking the wrong question all along. Jarvek sat in the bakery for a long time, the napkin still clutched in his massive clawed hand, the slice of honey bread untouched on the plate beside him, his amber eyes staring at nothing as his mind struggled to process what he was experiencing. Myra did not rush him or ask him questions or try to fill the silence with meaningless words. She simply returned to her work behind the counter, kneading dough and checking ovens and serving the occasional customer who came in for their daily bread, treating the presence of an alien emperor in her shop as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Finally, Jarvek spoke, his voice quiet and rough. Nothing like the thunderous command that had ordered the destruction of civilizations. "I do not understand," he said. "My people are the Draconith. We have existed for millions of years. We evolved on a world of fire and stone where only the strongest survived. We learned early that power was the only thing that mattered, that fear was the ultimate weapon, that mercy was weakness and compassion was death." He looked down at the napkin in his hand, at the small faded flowers embroidered by fingers long turned to dust. "We conquered our first neighboring world 800,000 years ago, and we have not stopped since. Every species we encountered either submitted to our rule or was destroyed. There was never any third option. Fear was our tool, and death was our trade." Myra finished shaping a loaf of bread and slid it into the oven before turning to face him, wiping her flour-covered hands on her apron. "And how did that make you feel?" she asked. "All those years of conquest and destruction, all those worlds burned and species enslaved. Did it make you happy?" Jarvek was silent for a long moment. "I do not remember what happy feels like," he admitted, and there was something like surprise in his voice, as if he had never considered this question before. "I do not remember what anything feels like. I do not remember what anything feels like. I do not remember what anything feels like. It has been so long since I felt anything at all that I thought the ability had simply gone away, burned out by the centuries, like a star that has used up all its fuel. But you feel something now," Mira said gently. "You felt something when you touched that napkin." "Yes," Jarvek said, and his voice cracked on the word. I do not know how to describe it. It was like being warm after being cold for so long that I forgot warmth existed, like seeing color after a lifetime of gray, like hearing music after an eternity of silence." He looked up at the old woman with something like desperation in his ancient eyes. "What is wrong with me? What did this napkin do to me? What did you do to me?" Myra walked over and sat down in the chair across from him again, her old bones creaking as she settled into place, her eyes meeting his without flinching. "Nothing is wrong with you," she said. "Something is finally right. That napkin did not put anything into you that was not already there. It just woke up something that had been sleeping for a very long time." She reached out and placed her small, weathered hand on his massive armored claw, her touch gentle and warm and utterly without fear. "You asked me why we do not fear you," she said. "And I told you that fear is just a feeling, but that is only part of the answer. The real answer is that we have learned something about fear that your people never did." "What is that?" Jarvek asked. "That fear and love cannot exist in the same space," Myra said. "When your heart is full of love, there is no room for fear. When you are holding on to something more important than your own survival, death stops being so scary." My grandmother understood this. That is why she made napkins while bombs fell around her. That is why she sang lullabies to children in bomb shelters. That is why she taught my mother to bake bread, and my mother taught me. She squeezed his claw gently. "We are not fearless," she continued. "We are terrified. Every single human on this planet is scared right now. We know your fleet could destroy us in minutes. We know there is nothing we can do to stop you if you decide to attack. But we have something more powerful than fear to hold on to. Love Jarvek said, and the word felt strange in his mouth. Unfamiliar and awkward, like a language he had once known but long forgotten. Love, Myra confirmed. Love for our families and our friends. Love for our world and our history. Love for the future we hope to have. Love for the small, beautiful things that make life worth living. A warm slice of bread on a cold morning. A child's laughter in a park. A napkin embroidered with flowers. She smiled at him. And there was something infinite in that smile. Something vast and ancient and impossibly strong. Your people conquered fear by becoming fearless, she said. You burned away everything soft and gentle and kind until there was nothing left but hard scales and cold hearts and empty eyes. You thought that made you powerful, but really it just made you hollow. Jarvek flinched at her words. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. We conquered fear differently, Myra continued. We did not try to become fearless. We just learned to love more than we feared. We filled our hearts so full of good things that there was no room left for the darkness to take hold. The dragon. King looked at the small old woman before him. This fragile creature who would die of old age in a handful of years, whose species had existed for barely a blink of time compared to his own. And he understood suddenly that she was stronger than he had ever been. He had conquered 1,000 worlds with fire. And terror and death, she had conquered something far more powerful with bread and napkins and love. How? He asked. And his voice was almost a whisper now. How do I learn what you know? How do I find what I have lost? It has been so long. I do not even know where to begin. Myra reached over and picked up the plate with the slice of honey bread. Holding it out to him, you begin by eating this, she said. You begin by accepting a gift offered in kindness. You begin by sitting in this small, warm place, letting yourself feel whatever you feel without trying to crush it or control it. She pressed the plate into his hands. You begin by remembering that you were not always what you are now. That somewhere deep inside you there is still a creature capable of love and joy and wonder. A creature that got buried under 10,000 years of war and conquest but never quite died. Jarvek looked at the bread in his hands, at the golden crust and the soft sweet interior, at the steam rising gently into the warm air. And then, he asked. Myra smiled, and then you decide what kind of creature you want to be. You decide whether you want to keep being the Dragon King who burns worlds and knows nothing but conquest, or whether you want to become something new, something better, something worthy of the life you have been given. She stood up slowly, her joints popping and creaking, and walked back toward her counter. But first, she said over her shoulder, you eat the bread. Everything else can wait until after you have eaten. Jarvek looked at the slice of honey bread for a long moment. Then, slowly, carefully, the Dragon King of the 17 systems raised it to his mouth and took a bite, and for the first time in 3,000 years, he tasted something sweet. The transport beam carried Jarvek back to his flagship as the sun was setting on the human city below, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold that reminded him of the amber fire in his own eyes. Colors that seemed somehow more beautiful now than they had seemed when he had arrived. Admiral Korath was waiting for him in the transport chamber, surrounded by guards and advisors and weapons specialists, all of them eager to hear the order to begin the bombardment, all of them ready to watch another world burn beneath the guns of the Draconith fleet. But Jarvek did not give that order. Instead, he walked past them in silence, his massive clawed feet echoing on the metal floor of the ship, his amber eyes staring straight ahead as if he could see something they could not. One hand pressed against his chest, where he had tucked a small folded napkin beneath his armor. My Emperor, Korath called after him, confusion and alarm mixing in his voice. What happened down there? What did you learn? Are the humans hiding some weapon we should be concerned about? Jarvek stopped walking and stood still for a moment, his back to his admiral. his gaze fixed on the viewport ahead, where the blue and green world of Earth hung in the darkness of space. "There is no weapon," he said finally. And his voice was different now, softer and rougher at the same time, like stone that had been worn smooth by centuries of flowing water. "The humans have no secret technology, no hidden defense. Nothing that could stop us if we decided to attack. Then why do you hesitate?" Korath demanded. "Give the order, and let us finish this. Let us add their world to our empire, and move on to the next conquest." Jarvex turned to face his admiral, and Korath took an involuntary step back at what he saw in his emperor's eyes. There was something there that had not been there before. Something that Korath had never seen in any Draconith face in all his centuries of service. Something that looked almost like warmth. "We are leaving," Jarvex said. The silence that followed his words was absolute. Every being in the transport chamber frozen in shock, unable to believe what they had just heard. "I am sorry, my emperor," Korath said slowly. "I must have misunderstood. Did you say we are leaving?" "I did," Jarvex confirmed. "Order the fleet to withdraw. We are leaving this system, and we are never coming back." But why?" Korath sputtered. "We have never retreated. We have never shown mercy. We have never altered course for any reason but strength. The other systems will see this as weakness. They will think we can be defied. Let them think what they want," Jarvex said. And he began walking again toward his private chambers at the heart of the ship. "I have seen something today that I did not know still existed, something I thought I had lost forever, and I am not going to destroy it." He paused at the door to his chambers and looked back at his stunned admiral. "I am not going to destroy them," he said quietly, "because they taught me something I had forgotten, something that my people forgot so long ago that we do not even remember losing it." "What?" Korath asked, his voice barely a whisper. What could these primitive creatures possibly teach the Dragon King? Jarvex reached into his armor and pulled out the small folded napkin that Mira had given him, holding it gently in his massive clawed hand, as if it were the most precious thing in the universe. "They taught me why we fight," he said. "And more importantly, they taught me what we should be fighting for." He disappeared into his chambers before Korath could respond, leaving his admiral standing in the transport room with a fleet of warships and no enemy to use them. Against the order went out across the Draconith armada, and one by one the great ships began to turn away from Earth, their engines igniting with blue-white fire as they prepared to leave this system and never return down below. In a small bakery on a quiet street in a city called Riverside, an old woman named Myra looked up at the sky through her window and smiled. She could not see the fleet departing. It was too far away and too high up for human eyes to detect. But somehow she knew that the danger had passed. Somehow she knew that her bread and her napkin had done what no weapon could have done. She turned back to her oven and pulled out a fresh tray of honey bread, the warm, sweet smell filling her small shop and drifting out into the evening air, thousands of light years away, in the cold darkness between stars. Emperor Jarvex the Undying sat alone in his chambers and held a small embroidered napkin in his hands. He listened to the song it sang, the song of love and hope and stubborn courage, the song of a grandmother who had refused to let darkness win. And he felt something blooming in his chest that he had not felt in 3,000 years. He did not have a name for it yet. He had forgotten the words his people once used for such things. But he knew it was precious, and he knew he never wanted to lose it again years later. When historians wrote about the great mystery of Earth, about the only world in 17 systems to turn away the Draconith fleet without firing a single shot, they would speculate about secret weapons and hidden defenses and diplomatic genius. They would never know the truth. They would never know that the Dragon King had been defeated not by armies or technology or cunning, but by an old woman with flour on her hands and a napkin embroidered with flowers. They would never know that the most powerful force in the universe was not fear or fire or destruction, but the simple stubborn love of a species that refused to stop hoping, even when hope seemed foolish, and they would never know that somewhere, in the vast cold reaches of space, an ancient emperor sat alone in his chambers each night and listened to a napkin sing, learning slowly and painfully how to feel again, how to love again, how to be more than just a conqueror of worlds. The napkin song played on, woven into the fabric of history, a quiet melody of courage and compassion that had saved a world and changed a heart. And, in a small bakery on a planet called Earth, Mira kept baking her bread, kept her door unlocked and her ovens warm, just in case another lost soul wandered in from the cold, because that was what humans did. That was what humans had always done. And that was why, in the end, they had won.